level, I think Madiba had long developed a perspective that it was necessary to go to war. And this he had articulated as far back as 1952-53, for which he was censored by the National Executive. But that didn't mean he abandoned it. Was that a conception well thought out? Or would that be a viewpoint that he held because of the hot blood in him? It's an open question. I think he recounts in his autobiography that the debate in the National Executive, both of the ANC and of the joint executives of the Congresses held in Tongaat, where the decision to form Umkhonto was taken, he himself was prepared to put weight to the other side of the arguments. For example, he recalls in his autobiography that when he, Madiba, criticized the inadequacy of the strategy of non-violence, the late J.N. Singh responded by saying, "It is not non-violence that has failed us, we have failed non-violence." And in his autobiography he says he has never forgotten that statement. So in his mind, while the results are right and celebrated, the issue was never closed, although his position at that time was very clear. So, at the personal level, I think there have been times that his relationships, e.g., I think it was both a personal and a political act when he came out of prison that he went and visited the late Moroka, the former president of the ANC, who had deserted us, who was in the leadership at the time of the Defiance trial, Defiance campaign, and who, when the arrest took place and the trial took place, took his own defense and repudiated the principles of our struggle, and for which he was removed as president of the ANC. But after Madiba came out of prison, he went and paid a visit to Morocco. I have not sat down to talk to him what was his message, but I think that there were many, many facets to that action, and amongst them was the acknowledgement that maybe the political difference had spilled over into a personal difference, and that you should not treat differences that arise in the public space to influence your personal relationships. So, human, that's a trite statement, but it's true, and we do not have to bend over backwards to find that reality in Madiba. He loses his temper. I have asked him on one occasion, laughingly and jokingly, I said, "Hey, don't you ever get scared? And don't you realize that you sometimes make terrible mistakes?" And I was talking about one incident, I can't remember at the moment, that took place in history in our aspect of our struggle. And he said, "You know what you boys don't understand?" He says that when I lose my temper and I say things, I go back that night, and then he says, I start trembling. What have I done? I've reacted in anger, and I've now messed up the struggle. And then he would take corrective action. The same, you don't notice it because he screens it. I don't remember which comrades tell the story during the election run-up in 1994. They were with him on a charter plane to Natal, where he had gone electioneering, and one of the engines packed in. And the pilot informed them, and here was the plane lurching, and the comrades say Madiba kept on the discussion with them. And when the plane touched ground, they were fine. And someone went to Madiba later and said, "Ben, Madiba, you just carried on the conversation. Weren't you scared?" And his answer was, "Listen, you didn't see the state of my pants. But what good was it going to do to keep talking about the engine that's blown?" he says, so he saw his duty to overcome his human reaction, to keep the comrades engaged in discussion on the political problems they were discussing, so that their minds would not dwell and they would not crack up in that moment by only thinking what happens now. Now the plane is shuddering and maybe the next engine is gone. That is not going to help the pilot and not going to help you. So yes, every person in that situation is very, very human. They have their fault lines. Nobody is perfect. What is special about Madiba is the way he reaches out at times to make up for what he would regard as an unacceptable lapse on his part, where his reaction in the public space is carried over into the personal space.
I part from my wife with no recriminations. I embraced her with all the love and affection I have nursed for her inside and outside prison from the moment I first met her. Ladies and gentlemen, I hope you'll appreciate the pain I have gone through. And I now end this interview.
Nobody.
Thank you very much.
I think it's almost a truism of the life of Mandela and a number of us that we acted the way we had to, and in the process, the people who got most injured were not the enemy, but the people who were closest to you. And I think that it's a type of question that we need to ask with a huge sense of indebtedness to those who were injured. Because few of us realize the extent of the guilt that such pain on those close to you has vested into the individuals like Mandela. The fact that they have not shown that in public space and even in their privacy must not allow us to diminish our responsibility to those pains. And I say this from a point of view of the immense contradiction inside the individual's conscience. I think you should re-look at Madiba's face, because it's the only time you will see it on camera. No, you'll see it twice. You should look at the Madiba and study his face and body when he announced his separation from Winnie. And I think you must look at Madiba's face and body when he announced the death of Makhato and that Makhato had died of AIDS. Nothing in the words that he used will answer your question. Nothing in the words that he used will betray that sense of guilt that a number of us feel. But I think his demeanor and his face tells it all when you look at those two clips. They are the only two clips that I can recall in this instant discussion that show us that.
Thank you. Well, as South Africa prepares for the final